Lebanon is an economic crisis. Lebanon is in a state where its people do not want to go to war. And you want to know what? This is a great time. This is a fantastic time to bring up this interview, to give you guys a perspective from the Arab world of what Hamas is being, how Hamas is being viewed in the Arab world right now. To give you questions that they directed towards Hamas's leader abroad. So this is the leader, not the leader of Hamas, but he is in the leadership of Hamas for their agents abroad, for their political activities outside of Gaza, outside of Palestine, in places like, for example, Qatar. So that's his job. And in this interview with Al Arabiya, which is a Saudi Arabian news outlet, it's based in Riyadh, they really grill the guy. And when I say grill the guy, I mean they really grill him. They asked him if it was in the best interest of Palestinians, how they really think that Hezbollah is going to get involved when the Lebanese people are in economic crisis and they weren't looking for a war. Did he ask other countries in the region that support them if they wanted this type of intervention, if they were ready to support them in this type of an attack? How did this attack help the lives of the Palestinian people, killing all the civilians in southern Israel? And they acknowledge that civilians were killed in southern Israel, not the Hamas guy, but the journalist. This grilling shows, I think, in my opinion, I think this shows that while much of the Arab world is horrified by the actions of Israel in Gaza, whether it be the amount of civilian casualties that are coming from the bombing campaign, whether it be what looks like collective punishment with the siege in Gaza, with the denial of water and food and fuel from getting in there. Hamas has all of that stored in tunnels. Working class Palestinians do not. Many are also honestly confused as to how Hamas thought this was going to end any differently. And I think this is really expressed in this interview. And so it really shows that, and even though I think a lot of people don't pay attention to Arab perspectives, that the Arab world isn't just like all their politics. And this is how sometimes it's talked about online. It's just like, oh, it's just like the Arab, this is like Team Arab and this is like Team Jew. And that's how it's viewed or how it's talked about a lot of times on Twitter and social media. But there is, just like there's a complexity of different opinions and perspectives from Israelis, from those who are in the Likud camp, from those who believe that Likud, and this is the majority of Israelis at this point, has failed the country in defending them, that they build up a security apparatus that's failed. There are Israelis that want to go into Gaza. There's Israelis who think that it's a terrible idea and they don't have a plan. That also, those diversities of perspectives also exist in the Arab world as well. And so I wanted to show this interview. It's quite interesting.
عملية من هذا النوع تقوم بها حماس.
The kind of attack Hamas carried out is not a regular operation. It is more like a declaration of war. So some people ask what you expected would be the Israelis' reaction. We are watching the great human tragedy that is unfolding in the Gaza Strip. The people of Gaza woke up to this. The other factions, the Palestinian Authority and the people of Gaza, were not consulted about this. You made the decision all by yourselves. This ingenious moment that the Al-Qassam brigades managed to surprise the enemy. So the Qassam brigades, what he's talking about is like the shock troop of Hamas. That's what he's talking about. This right there, this is the foreign leader, a Hamas leader abroad, Khaled Mashal. Oh, this is from yesterday? I thought it was from today. Well, it's from yesterday. Managed to surprise the enemy. It had to be kept secret and known only to a small group of people. We did not embark on a new enterprise of resistance. It is all a part of the atmosphere of resistance, where a certain measure is taken. It is in the context of legitimate resistance that our people have agreed upon. Okay, so you made some important points. You say that it is legitimate resistance in your view. But what the people in the West have seen on the TV screens was transgressions by Hamas against Israeli civilians. You are responsible for Hamas's image abroad. Hamas is now being compared to ISIS. This is an accusation fabricated by Netanyahu, and unfortunately, the West is collaborating with him. Now, number one, this shows that I think that the Arab world understands that when you, and of course, this is not that crazy to know that they understand. This is just, I think, basic logic, that if you go into a country and just start shooting people at random in their homes, you're going to piss off that country, and that's going to start a war, or is at least very likely to start a war, whether you take captives and hostages or not. And she's asking the logical question of, okay, now you're being bombed by Israel after going to Israel and killing the most Israelis in the history of Israel in one attack. What did you expect to happen? Of course this is happening. You didn't consult anyone about this. And his response isn't, well, actually, it was okay to do it. He just denies that they killed any civilians, even though we have security cam footage, we have footage from cell phones, we have pictures, we have footage from abroad, from above, from satellites, of all these villages just being burnt to the ground and the smoke plumes rising. We have GoPro footage from Hamas. We have GoPro footage from Israeli soldiers. We have dash cam footage from cars of just all numbers of atrocities of people being shot in their homes, people being shot in cars, people being executed, them being burnt in their homes with their families, men, women, and children. The evidence is overbearing. And that's why those images can be shown in the West. And when you show those images in the West, people are going to be more sympathetic to the idea of an Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip. And when people start making arguments about Palestinian occupation, there are going to be people, when hearing that conversation, when they think about resisting Israel, and when there's conversations about resisting Israel, and he talks about legitimate resistance, people are going to hear the words Palestinian resistance, and they're just going to think about grandmas being mowed down in their bed. It's not a great image for the Palestinian movement. He's responsible for their image abroad. This is a fantastic question from the interviewer. Dear sisters, nations are not easily liberated. The Russians sacrificed 30 million people in World War II in order to liberate it from Hitler's attack. The Vietnamese sacrificed 3.5 until they defeated the Americans. Afghanistan sacrificed millions of martyrs to defeat the USSR and then the United States. The Algerian people sacrificed 6 million martyrs over 130 years. The Palestinian people are just like any other nation. No nation is liberated without sacrifices. The thing is, though, when you look at how the Soviet Union sacrificed all those people, a lot of those people died because of how shoddy Soviet command was. And when Soviet command makes a poor decision, you don't just say, martyrs are martyrs. What you should do is say, wow, that was a terrible mistake. We should not do that again because we don't want to throw lives away. And so when reviewing this form of Palestinian resistance, just from the perspective of you wanting to gain Palestinian freedom, this feels like, what is it, like the underwear gnomes from South Park? Underwear gnomes, South Park. Here it is. This is exactly what I feel like right now. So it's number one, stage one is going to Israel and kill a bunch of children and people in their beds and elderly people. Just massacre a bunch of people. Phase two, phase three, liberation. Liberation. Phase three, we've liberated Palestine. We've liberated the people. If there's a bunch of sacrifices that are being made, those sacrifices should be made for a good purpose. It's not like they just demolished the border wall, had a bunch of people go on the other side, protest, bring all this international pressure on Israel, and they've advanced the Palestinian cause in some way, and now Israel's in a bind because Netanyahu made their security look weak. It made it look like the perpetuation of the conflict was a failure. Now all people are talking about, and all the press is trying to talk about in a lot of instances, is, wow, look at all those kids that got killed, instead of, hey, let's talk about the validity of the Palestinian struggle. And I do want to remind people, just a few months ago, there was a poll done. 65% of Palestinians, and I know a lot of times members of the Israeli Knesset, members of the Israeli press, members of a lot of times the Western press, will try to portray Palestinians in a very, like, just are all bloodthirsty animals. And I'm not saying all of them, I'm saying some figures within them, within the Western press, within the Israeli press. But 65% of Palestinians did not want to break the ceasefire with Israel. He is going against what the people in the Gaza Strip want. How can you demand that the West and the world in general support the Palestinian cause when the things Hamas perpetrated against the Israeli civilians are in the headlines? You know that Israel gained a lot of sympathy because of these scenes.
هل في فكر
Is treating
وعقيدة
civilians
حماس
this way part of
التعامل هكذا
Hamas's
مع المدنيين؟
ideology? Sister, I told you that Hamas, the Al-Qassam Brigade, and our military organizations focus their resistance on the occupation forces, on the soldiers. But in all wars, there are some civilian victims. We are not responsible for them. Number one, they did attack soldiers, that is true, but the vast majority of the casualties on the Israeli side, from the footage that we can see, seems to be civilians. There is so much footage of civilians being killed. If this was one civilian got killed or two civilians got killed, then you can compare it to the Israeli airstrikes and you'd be like, okay, one or two civilians got killed. In the grand scheme of things, that's a horrible tragedy, but maybe that just shows that there's not a pattern of targeting civilians. Tons and tons and of course you'd have to look at the circumstances of their death, but maybe that could be evidence that they're not categorically targeting civilians. But tons and tons and tons of civilians were killed in their homes. Homes were burnt to the ground. People were shot in their cars. There's footage of it all across the board that is being played on repeat on mainstream news. And the reason why is because they did it. So he can't deny it. We can all see it. Oh my lion eyes. Will you apologize for what was done to the Israeli civilians on October 7th? With all due respect, your question, forgive me for saying this, apology should be demanded from Israel. You asked me a question and I'm answering it with a question. Hamas does not kill civilians on purpose. It focuses on the soldiers, period. You said that what Hezbollah is doing is good, but it's not rising to the required level. Can we understand from that Hezbollah and the resistance of Axis has so far failed your expectations regarding their reactions? We in Palestine are fighting. This is our position and our decision. Outside of Palestine, we are grateful to whoever is standing by us. Hezbollah, the Lebanese front is now on fire, and we are grateful for that. Whatever is done by the Lebanese, by Palestinians, or by anyone, Hezbollah has an active role there. Those clashes in South Lebanon are good and support our cause. But the scope of the battle, when the title is Al-Aqsa Flood, and that's a reference to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which had a lot of protest violence and police beatings around it in Jerusalem, I think it was a year or two ago. Greater things are needed, certainly, but we should not sing out Lebanon and Hezbollah. Let us talk about the countries bordering with Israel, the great Egypt that has waged large wars. Today, the Egyptians are boiling with anger. We salute the Egyptian people, and we want more. Currently, Egypt is blocking Palestinian refugees from leaving to get into safety because Palestinians who find refuge in churches can still be bombed. And I'm going to talk about this later. We're going to go into more detail. But a few days ago, a Greek Orthodox church that its foundations were built in like 420 AD when I think it was Porphyrius, which is the name of the church, Saint Porphyrius, died. And the structure that it's built out of now was built in the 12th century. So it's a historic Greek Orthodox church that supports the 1% of the Gazan population that is Christian. It was bombed by the IDF. The IDF admit this. They say, oopsie doopsie, we were trying to hit this one Hamas HQ, and it looks like we hit a wall. We hit a wall, and there's been reports of casualties. 16 to 18 people died. 16 to 18 people died. There is good reason for the civilians in this church to want to leave to get this a safer place, and instead of placing pressure on Egypt to try to get Palestinian refugees and get them to a safer location, Egypt refuses to open the border. They refuse to open the border. And the reason why Hamas is okay with that is because Egypt doesn't want Palestinians to leave. They've given two reasons, right? The main reason they have only given one reason, but there's multiple reasons. The reason that they give is they don't want Palestinians to leave because then the Israelis, in their view, will take over Gaza and then they'll be permanently displaced in the Sinai Peninsula, and they don't want that. But they also don't want a large Palestinian refugee community, which also has set up in countries like Jordan. And then you can look at the Black September War and things that authoritarian regimes in the region would be scared of, any upheaval that could be caused in the country. When you look at Hamas sprung from the Muslim Brotherhood. It was the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt that was overthrown by El-Sisi, the current dictator. So you could see why he might be a little antsy about possibly allowing a lot of Palestinian refugees to come, or for Hamas to expel itself into Egypt. So there's multiple motivations here. But if his interest was in the interest of the Palestinian people and at the self-serving interests of Hamas, he would be criticizing them for not taking in refugees who want to flee. I demand a more powerful position by the Egyptian leaders. What do you mean by more? With regard to Lebanon, you know this and you can see it on social media. The situation of the people in Lebanon is very bad. The last thing they need is another war that will come with another bill to pay. They say Khaled Mashal is sitting in an air-conditioned room talking about war, jihad, and bombings. We are in the middle of the battlefield. Nobody is sitting this one out. The Hamas leaders in Gaza and abroad are, what is it saying, are running this war together. You decided to launch this October 7th attack. And now you are asking the Arab countries to join in. Arabs did not participate in making this decision. Nobody in the Arab world said to Egypt, why did you surprise us with the 1973 war? This is because Egyptian land in the Sinai Peninsula was theirs. People might object to an Arab country deciding all by itself to launch an offensive against a neighbor or another party. But when people are under occupation, they have a natural right to do so. Nobody has the right to ask us why we did this and whether or not we consulted with anyone. It is true that people under occupation do have a right to exist, but also people under occupation do not have a right to just go around and randomly murder civilians. They don't have a right to do that. And when that is how you launch your war, it is going to make it a lot more difficult to pitch it to people to join in. Has Iran lived up to your expectations so far? Iran has been speaking about this destruction of Israel. Our job is to make requests and remind people of their promises, and everyone is responsible for their own decision. What do you plan to do about the hostages? What do you want in exchange? As I've said, these are prisoners. Before talking about prisoners held by us, there are prisoners held by the enemy. There are about 5,500 of them. Now the number is 10,000. Every day, Israel arrests 1,000, 2,000, or 1,000 from the West Bank. The rule we follow is that the prisoners are swapped for prisoners. We took over 1,000 prisoners in exchange for Khaled. Khaled was an IDF soldier that Hamas captured that was exchanged for a lot of Palestinian prisoners. So today we have in our hands dozens of soldiers and officers. Inshallah, we will use them to empty the Israeli prisons, and our sons and daughters from all the factions will be released, inshallah. Now, I do want to quickly say, I don't like Mirror Me TV. Mirror Me TV picks up like the worst representations of the Arab world and blasts it and translates it. I wish that it translated other stuff as well, but this translation is accurate, as in what the words that they translated from him is accurate. And I do think that this video still showed a good perspective of the concerns of what many members of the Arab world have. Lebanese people don't want to be dragged into another war right now. I was talking to some Lebanese Ukrainians. They do this, and they were telling me, yeah, Lebanese people don't want to be dragged into another war right now. Many of them are absolutely horrified by what Hamas did in southern Israel, and they don't want to sign up for that. A lot of them despise, for good reason, whether it be Israel's invasion of southern Lebanon or Israel's treatment of Palestinians. They despise the IDF. They despise Israel, but they don't want to go into Israel and just start randomly mowing down people. Especially if that randomly mowing down people is gonna, number one, cost a ton of money, and number two, gonna lead to Lebanon being bombed with the shells that the United States is now sending over for Israel for the express purpose of a scenario like this playing out, if the war was to expand into a larger war in the region. Maybe that's why Hamas has been, not Hamas, but Hezbollah, while they have bombed Israel, northern Israel, there has been clashes on the border. They haven't launched any massive attack into Israel. They haven't tried to follow up on the October 7th attack, which I think Hamas probably wanted. But Lebanese people are not that interested in another war right now. And it's not just Lebanese people. There's people all around the Arab world who don't want to go to war with Israel right now. Many of them are unbelievably sympathetic with the Palestinian people in their struggle for freedom. that doesn't mean they're unbelievably sympathetic to randomly murdering civilians. And this has been polled with Palestinians before too, that they don't support randomly murdering civilians. And so when the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip didn't want to break the ceasefire, 65% of Palestinians didn't want to break the ceasefire, the majority of Palestinians don't want to target civilians, how are you going to expect the people who aren't even the ones that are occupied in other countries to want to sign up for that type of an operation or to follow up on a type of operation like that? It's really good to see a perspective like this from the Arab world. You don't often get these types of perspectives in the Western press because it's not our perspective.